Hi, I'm Aida Vigadaro and welcome to part 2 of my Savvy Guide to Collecting Art series. If you'd like to know a little bit about how the series came about and about my own background, do please check out the first in the series. I'll leave an image above of what that video looks like. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the next installment of my tips and advice on collecting in a savvy way. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to know what you're interested in terms of your art specialism, what you're looking to collect, how you're looking to collect, or any questions you might have about the collecting process. Thank you so much for watching. And as ever, if you do enjoy this content and find it helpful, do please like and subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Chapter 2: Identifying your goals and specialism. Once you have undertaken a degree of general research into the art market and feel that you have a pretty good overview, you can begin the important and potentially lucrative transition from being a generalist to becoming a specialist. In doing this, it is important to work out precisely what it is that you want to achieve through the art collection that you will build. Great collections have historically come about for a huge number of different reasons. Some collectors have ended up with an art collection more or less unwittingly, simply falling in love with an initial work, and then another, and so on. Others have purposefully built collections to showcase and champion the types of works that they particularly value, be it old master paintings or Chinese ceramics. Some collectors have an intellectual or political standpoint, perhaps wanting to put forward a particular point of view through their support and showcasing of a certain type of artist, perhaps collecting LGBT art or works by minorities, for example. Or there are those who are in it for the prestige and accomplishment of building a collection that is recognized as best in class within their area of specialism. Others may collect for philanthropic reasons, such as wanting to help overlooked artists to survive and be heard. Then there are the corporations that often appear to build high-profile collections as marketing tools, among other things. The famous Frieze Art Fair has been sponsored by Deutsche Bank, while Art Basel has been supported by UBS Bank in recent years, both corporations having their own significant collections. Many will collect for financial reasons. And within the broad field of art as an investment or asset class, there are different ways in which people break this area of investment up. Some, particularly professional dealers, buy art to sell on quickly, while others see it as a longer-term investment. Then there are those who wish to diversify their assets, for example, if they have most of their money tied up elsewhere, such as in their business or in property, and they want to spread their financial exposure. The encouraging reality is that a great number of these objectives are not mutually exclusive and can coexist quite happily, sometimes even enhancing one another. For example, the philanthropic collector, who wishes to buy from less visible artists to empower and give voice to them, might well end up finding that buying the works of certain marginalized artists can also be a wonderful financial investment as the artists become more recognized over time and their prices increase accordingly. Whatever one's motivation to collect art, I feel it is safe to say that many people, even those who don't actively plan to or want to sell their collections, would be gratified to know that the value of their collection on the marketplace was increasing and not decreasing. And what's more, it was far higher than their initial financial outlay. A premise of this book, then, is to help you to achieve that high value relative to your actual financial investment. What you then choose to do with your collection is entirely up to you. Now that we have identified a common goal of creating value through our collections, which does not detract from any additional goals we may also have, we should return to one of the principal tenets established in the first chapter. It is highly important for each collector to find a specialism within art. This is necessary in order to have a hope of gathering enough knowledge to be able to acquire strategically. A focused collection will also bring perspective and an in-depth insight that can't be achieved via a few disparate pieces. The narrower the focus, the better you can put together an authoritative collection. Not only this, your niche will give you a hook or an angle when raising the visibility of your collection, particularly useful when wanting to sell, and will also point you in the direction of a very focused and highly motivated set of buyers, if and when that time comes. The wonderful reality is that within the visual arts, the range of areas on which you can focus is so varied that it is virtually impossible not to find a theme compelling enough to pursue. To kickstart your idea flow, the next part of this chapter will list a variety of established subsections of the art market. This is just a fraction of the breadth and variety of sectors available to you. But it should give you a helpful nudge if you are short on ideas, and you can begin refining your focus from there. The key is to first let the ideas and the options flow. Initially, you should simply see what grabs you. You should start by thinking about what appeals to you, regardless of the practical considerations about how to make it work. After you have considered this wealth of possibility, you can break it down much further, led by the key questions you need to ask yourself to ensure that you are collecting in an area that best serves your unique skills, profile, and access. So, in this chapter, I will also talk you through the 4 questions you need to ask yourself that will further help you to sort through all that choice and identify your niche. In a report that Art Basel produced with UBS Bank, compiled by Dr. Claire McAndrews, they pointed out that within the art trade, there are many different definitions of the various sectors. However, for their analysis, they identified 6 key subsections. They described these as A, post-war and contemporary, defined as artists born after 1910. B, living artists, defined as artists alive at the time of writing, which are analysed as a subset of the post-war and contemporary sector. C, modern, and these are defined as artists born between 1875 and 1910. D, impressionist and post-impressionist, defined as artists born between 1821 and 1874. E, old masters, defined as artists born between 1250 and 1821. And F, European old masters, defined as old masters artists of European origin, which are analysed separately for them as a subset of the old masters sector. So, if we take these 6 subsections as a starting point, where we know there is already an existing market, we can then start to narrow our focus down into specialisms within them. Different ways to specialise include the following themes. First is geographical, i.e. Indian, Chinese, American art, or why not take it down from the national to the regional? For example, artists from or who use Yorkshire as their inspiration. We think of Hockney as perhaps the most famous of Yorkshire artists, but delve a little deeper and there was a plethora of talent from this historic county that a clever collection could draw out in illuminating ways. The reality is that pretty much any region in the world has some form of cultural heritage and identity that can be explored through art collecting if the collector is inspired. 2. Genre. Collections can also be defined by style. For example, street art, figurative art, abstract or conceptual art. 3. Medium. Do you collect only works on paper or in canvas or sculpture, for example? Perhaps you restrict your collection to black and white photography. Or what about subsections of fine jewellery or ceramics? Fourthly, you can look at the gender and age of artists. While things seem to be improving by some metrics in terms of gender balance in the global art market, women artists still account for far fewer of the works available at major art fairs than men. Perhaps you choose to look at underrepresented sections of artists, such as women, or early stage artists, though it must be pointed out that very early stage artists are a far riskier investment if financial gain is your main objective. If you can take a number of these filters and combine them, for instance, works on paper by Chinese female contemporary artists, then you are looking at a focused approach that you can really move forward with in a strategic and effective manner. But now that you are more cognizant of the key subsections and some of the options out there, how do you decide on exactly the right niche for you? Ultimately, there are 4 questions that should be able to point you in the best direction for you personally. And these are, firstly, what are your areas of artistic interest and passion? Secondly, what access can you have? Thirdly, what are your financial resources? And fourthly, what is the growth potential of the market? Let us take each of these questions in turn. It is important to choose a specialism that you do genuinely find interesting and perhaps are even passionate about, as that will incentivize you to persevere. It will also be obvious if you are not interested at all in the art and only doing it for the money. This will conversely impede your financial progress, as artists, galleries, and other potential sources of art will be less likely to cut you favourable deals or even gift you works if they feel that you don't appreciate the artistic merit of the work. There have been countless times when I've been able to purchase works far below market value, because the seller has specifically wanted me to have a particular work, owing to my clear response and connection to it. However, just as important to consideration as what you love is what access can you have, i.e., what will you most easily be able to get hold of. In order to grow as substantial a collection as possible in the shortest possible amount of time, you will want to make the acquisition process as easy and agreeable for yourself as you can. So by this I mean, if you are, for example, a young woman who is particularly sociable and good at connecting with other females, you may want to focus on mid-career contemporary female artists of your own region. These are artists you will likely not find it difficult to actually meet and engage with through the network of galleries and art events near you. And as you visit their studios and get to know them, you will find yourself in multiple scenarios where you are the first to see new works and can often even buy directly from some artists, depending on their contracts with galleries, at cheaper prices than at galleries, which typically add an additional 50%. You might then recommend these artists to others in your network and generate more sales for the artist and or their gallery, in which case you could reasonably expect to cut a deal to acquire your own works at below market prices. You may also be able to acquire a whole series of works from the studios of artists you meet, more cheaply than buying the works individually. Equally, you might be well placed to commission specific works on themes that you expect to become increasingly relevant in the future. When you are dealing with living artists you are able to connect with, a wealth of interesting opportunities open up to you. Be sure to consider any resources you may have within your circle of friends and family. If you happen to have a family connection who is particularly versed in old masters, for example, and you've been taken to every old masters exhibition at major museums since you were a child, don't hesitate to capitalize on this knowledge head start you were given. An older friend of mine used to be in a band when he was younger. The band achieved a fleeting year or so of fame and then crashed and burned. However, this particular guy got in with all the rock bands of his time, the 1980s punk rock era, and the photographers that travelled on the road with them. He kept in touch with them all his life. One particular photographer even gave him his whole archive shortly before his death. Nowadays, those punk era stars this photographer had photographed before he died have become legends and icons with the benefit of time and hindsight. His images of David Bowie, Mick Jagger in his prime, and many other British national treasures have formed the starting point for an extraordinary collection of British punk rock photography with a unique provenance for my friend, who was lucky enough to capitalise on his unique access to that punk rock scene and its characters. That's all very well, you may be thinking, but what if you work in the sort of job where you're always at your computer and can rarely get away to network and meet contemporary artists, gallerists, and culturally significant movers and shakers? The answer is to look at what you can do. Perhaps you are able to spend many hours perusing auction websites all over the world. Maybe then the smartest move is to focus on your near constant access to the internet and ultimately choose to snap up the best examples you can find of your specialism that you see online, only leaving very low online bids that you don't budge from, so that whenever you acquire a work, you know it is at a reasonable price and you didn't pay above its value according to your research. Really take the time to think and be sure that you can be in scenarios where you can easily acquire works on an ongoing basis. Ideally, art collecting should be something you don't really need to change your current lifestyle all that much to do. The third question to ask yourself is a straightforward question of financial resources. Specifically, what your entry-level price point is for art. What sort of prices are you comfortable spending, at least initially? For as you get more confidence in your collecting, you will likely be emboldened to spend larger sums, perhaps selling works at a profit to edit your collection or free up funds to add new works. To start with, you may have a budget of just a few thousand or even a few hundred to start you off on buying investment-grade art. It may surprise you, but this is absolutely doable. My own very first investment grade artwork cost me about £300. And by investment grade, I mean a work that will appreciate in price and be able to be sold on the secondary market, typically at auction or via a dealer. The art market has a rudimentary two-tier system: the primary market for first-time sales and the secondary or resale market. In the primary market, living artists sell original works or prints to collectors directly, more usually through galleries. Works sold in the primary market cover the whole rostrum, from new and emerging artists through to well-known luminaries. As some segments of this market are made up of lesser-known artists, buyers can be faced with a lack of full information and no reassurance of being able to sell the work on in future. Because of this, purchasing works by emerging artists on the primary market can sometimes be financially more risky. Once you know what sort of sums you are working with, that will allow you to rule out certain areas of collecting. For example, works on paper tend to be cheaper than works on canvas. So if your budget is at the lower end, you may want to focus on works on paper by a certain type of artist, street artists, for example, who are earlier in their career. The earlier in an artist's career, usually the cheaper the works will be, assuming we are looking at artists with an upward career trajectory. But you will have done your research. As advised above, dealing with very young artists does come with a note of caution, however. As exciting as new artists are to discover, artists who are mid or later in their careers are far safer investments, as typically they have established a reputation and a collector base, and so there is an existing secondary market that will allow for resale. With primary market-only artists, you run the risk of not being able to resell if and when the time comes. Those household name blue chip artists may be the safest of all, but they are already expensive. So if you are constrained by budget, I would focus on mid-career artists with room to grow. In addition, there are sometimes opportunistic chances to acquire reasonably priced inventory from expensive artists, such as distress sales, where a seller might need money quickly, which you may hear about once you become adequately plugged in with collectors and dealers. Similarly, you might want to look at prints and editions if your budget is very small. As long as the prints are limited edition and signed and the provenance is sound, they can be a good way to access works by very famous names at a fraction of the price of a unique work. There are limited edition signed Picasso prints, for example, available for less than £6,000. Yes, that's a lot of money, but it's not the millions you might think you needed to obtain a Picasso. If you are thinking in the tens of thousands per artwork or more, then a whole lot more choice opens up to you. You might want to look at some of the most prestigious contemporary artists, whose most important works can go for upwards of £1 million, but who also have certain works at more accessible prices. For example, somebody interested in contemporary sculpture might be able to seek out some of today's stars, such as Ella Natsui, whose famous bottle-top installations cost a huge amount, but who has lesser-known early works in materials such as wood, available at more accessible prices. Often, when I like an up-and-coming artist, but there was a great discrepancy in price between their current, sought-after works and the earlier works produced before the artist became known, I like to buy many of those earlier works at super prices. In time, once the artist's reputation is really at its peak, any works at all, whether old or new, should become expensive to acquire. You will, of course, want to be conscious of how long you expect to be in possession of your collections when you make your buying decisions. The final consideration to help you choose your niche is the growth potential of the area of specialism you are considering. This is something your research will help you identify. Are the prices starting to increase? Auction results over time can tell you this. Who is buying this type of art? Is the pool of buyers growing? Is the profile of this type of art gaining more attention amongst curators and the press, featuring more prominently at fairs? Of course, prices that are going up can also do the reverse and come down. But often, long before the prices come down drastically, there will be a period of stagnation where prices grow more slowly and then steady before they start to come down. So as long as you are sure to periodically be taking the temperature of the art market, you will be able to act accordingly and respond to any market signals. Many collectors prefer to focus their efforts where there is a finite supply of works. i.e., artists who are deceased and cannot produce more work. The advantage to this is obvious: a limited supply sustains its rareness. However, this may be a way to make safer purchases that have and will endure the test of time, but it is not necessarily the way to make the fastest gains in terms of investment. The scope for living artists to explode and gain notoriety, and accordingly high values, is much higher than it has ever been, what with all the platforms on offer today, from art fairs to a much more pervasive press. If you can learn the skill to identify accurately the art stars of our time, the value of their work can rise 50-fold in the space of just a few years. Of course, you don't have that peace of mind of having a truly rare work, as nothing is to stop the artist producing multiple similar works once he or she finds critical acclaim with a particular style. Therefore, my personal thoughts on the matter are that those who want to use art as a safe alternative investment may be better off focusing on those traditional blue-chip names who are mostly no longer with us. But the more ambitious, adventurous collector who is looking to see the highest increase in value might do better to work out which type of contemporary artist to focus their collecting efforts on.